Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 64. And Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy feet have rest. But Yahweh shall give thee there a trembling heart, and a failing of eyes, and a sorrow of mind. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shall have known assurance of thy life. In the morning thou shalt say, Would God it were even, and at evening thou shalt say, Would God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart, wherewith thou shalt fear, for the sight of thine eyes, which thou shalt see. And Yahweh shall bring thee to Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is your brother Hawayala. I'm called to be a minister of our Lord and Savior Yahweh Shah HaMashiach by the will of our Heavenly Father Yahweh. Peace and blessings and mercy be abound unto you and those of you that are holding on to the gospel unto the time of our deliverance. Wanted to go into this lesson in part because of the increased amount of people that are now denying that our people were brought into captivity over here by way of slave ships. Something that has been well documented and has been spoken even by some of our ancestors in various accounts. And this particular one that I'm going into is actually an account of one of the last people that was actually taken on slave ship to America. Having studied the whole transatlantic slave trade, some of the events that occurred in the Middle Ages in West and Central Africa, in addition to the events that occurred in the New World and the entire transatlantic slave trade, understanding that it was not something that ended in time of a point of legislation. Many countries wrote different laws in which they instituted a ban on these trades, and really these things were not because they felt sorry about our people that were being captive and being sent over here, but because it was part of an economic plan to destabilize their trading partners in the lands in which they were bringing our brothers and sisters from. Okay, and this particular article is actually about one of the last survivors of a slave ship. Okay, and it's an interview. Now this is from history.com. This is dated May 3rd, so it's just actually written. It is based on an interview with the last slave ship survivor gave an interview in the 1930s, and it just surfaced. Now they have pictures of the man, and I'm going to go over a little bit about his history and where he's from, even show it on a map. And this is him. Okay, and we're going to go down. His name was Kujo Lewis. That was his slave name as he was brought over here. The last surviving captive of the last slave ship to bring Africans to the U.S. Right, so that's key, to the United States. Okay, not to Brazil, because Brazil did not end theirs, I want to say, until the late 19th century. I want to say it was probably maybe in the 1880s. So other countries, other places, they didn't end that particular trading that was going on. Okay, now this right here is another dagger, right, to those people that loveth and maketh a lie, saying that there were no slave ships, that the so-called black man in America was already native to this land prior to even who the people that are known as Native Americans are today, which again does not fit biblical prophecy by saying that there was no slave ships. Okay, now many of these people that are saying this, many of these people are not Israelites. Some of these people, if they do become one, or they could become maybe taking on that identity, not believing in the gospel, which is a whole nother subject. If they take on that identity, many of these people also become, pro-Negro, all 12 tribes are black Israelites as well. Okay, now this has to go away because of the fact that this type of doctrine is something that can, believe it or not, sway even those that already believed otherwise and have learned the truth otherwise about the fact that there was slave ships here. Part of the reason why this is occurring, okay, and part of the reason why this is occurring is because of the fact that the so-called black man in America has had an identity crisis more than that has been very detrimental, all right, to our people, because even those that come from other countries, whether it's from Africa, West Africa, or whether it's from the Caribbean or Central or South America, they're able to hold on to this false identity of the countries that they're from. All right, whether they call themselves Mexican, Nicaraguan, Trinidadian, Bahamian, Bajan, Jamaican, Haitian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, all these things. And they're able to bring this particular false identity over here. And in that, it provokes and causes a stir of jealousy, all right, amongst those that are over here that are called, African American as a byword. And because of this lack of identity to hold on to, there's now been a growing movement to push this narrative that they are natives to this land as a way to kind of project an identity about themselves. But at the same time, this also removes the other experience of what happened to our brothers and sisters that are over here in this land, which would be the people known as the North American Indians, okay, or the Seminole Indians. Okay, so this has to be brought out in order to destroy this narrative that this event didn't occur. Okay, and this is what's going on. I mean, I've actually been on comic boards, I've been on Instagram, going back and forth with people that are pushing this stuff, and they keep saying these things. They say stuff like, "Oh, there's no more slave ships. How come there's no slave ships? How come they can't show us one?" But these same people will not tell you about how come they can't find any of the ships in which, the colonizers, the oppressors, the Edomites came on. How come they're not around? Do they understand anything about shipbuilding? Do they understand anything about how long wood can last? Do they understand anything about the fact that newer ships in the 20th century were built with metals and not with wood? And which is the reason why you can still find old ships from back, decades ago, still around to today. So these are things that we have to crush in order to basically hold firm to this gospel, because these are part of the, strange doctrines and the fables that are coming up. And they ultimately, if you believe in these things, it will leaven up your belief in the gospel. Just like things like Flat Earth did, just like other things that are being pushed out did, okay? That are happening right now in Israel, okay? So, let me go on into this article. All right, so it says here, again, that Kujo Lewis, the last surviving captive of the last slave ship to bring Africans to the United States. Now, none of these people, when you go back then, they were not called Africans, okay? They're called Africans in today's term because there is no such thing as an African, okay? I'm going to keep saying that, but, a lot of people don't want to, take hold to that, and they're going to always be in a ball of confusion whenever these type of stories are brought up, okay? That's the reason why, again, you have to clarify and quantify what we're talking about. All right, so there's no such thing as the Africans, neither the natives of the land, neither the people that were brought over here. Okay, there's no such thing. Okay, now for the sake of this, we're going to read it the way we're going to deal with, tribal information, as it's called. People have what they call tribes. All these people were what you would call their own unique nations within these different lands, which we'll talk about, and we'll talk about his particular, set of where he came from. Okay, so it says roughly 60 years after the abolition of slavery, anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston made an incredible connection. She located the last arriving captive of the last slave ship to bring Africans to the United States. Hurston, a known figure from the Harlem Renaissance, would later write the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, conducted interviews with the survivor, but struggled to publish them as a book in the early 1930s. Okay, well, now in the early 1930s, one of the events that's going on was the Great Depression. Okay, on top of that, being a so-called black person trying to publish a book is also hard as well. Okay, so we would have to have an understanding of why this thing did not probably come out at that particular time. Okay, now it says here, in fact, there are only now being released to the public in a book called Barakun, the story of the last black cargo, that comes out on May 8th, 2018. Now, this is the lady, okay, author Zora Neale Hurston. She was born in 1903 and died in 1960. It says Hurston's book tells the story of Kujo Lewis, who was born in what is now the Western African country of Benin. Okay, now at the time, back during that time when he was taken, it was never known as Benin. It was known as Dahomey. Okay, this is what people have to understand when some of these terms are put upon places, on people and places. These places by name didn't even exist. For example, when he was taken, there was no such thing as Nigeria. If you went back during the time when he was taken in around the 1860, and you told someone that you were going to Nigeria, no one would know where the hell you were talking about. If you told someone you were going to Benin back in that time, they would think you're going to the southern central part of what is now modern day Nigeria, not where this place is that they call the country of Benin today. Okay, which I'll show you on the map. Okay, now it says originally named Kosula, he was only 19 years old when members of the neighboring Dahomeyan tribe captured him and took him to the coast. Okay, so the neighboring Dahomey tribe, this is what some of the things that I've been trying to tell, different people. Okay, with me having understanding of, West Africa through being over there, through my parents being from there, I'm able to explain some of these things that a lot of brothers maybe not understand. That you had areas and territories that belonged to Israelites and belonged to the heathen nations. Okay, this is part of the reason why when you go into the book of Judges and you see when the children of Israel were under the oppression of the Philistines had Israelites in captivity under what's called a vassal state. What does that mean? That means that they didn't take over their lands. They had basically power and rule over them. They can basically tax them and take goods and services from them for their own benefit. A lot of people don't have to look into things called vassal states. Our understanding of empire and conquering and control has been changed because of who is currently ruling in power, right? Which is the Edomites, who actually was prophesied to come take and plunder and take people's land over and oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. Okay, so even during these times when you had these empires set up back during these slave trading empires in West Africa, you had territories in which they raided into, okay, that were basically their enemies, okay, that they took and captured people from, okay, and that fits in with prophecy as well. All right, so we're gonna go and continue on. It says there he and about 120 others were sold into slavery and crammed onto the Clotilda, the last slave ship to reach the continental United States. Okay, now as a disclaimer as well, the Dahomey tribe, okay, were the ones that were doing this in this land. This is called the Dahomey Empire. Okay, you cannot have an empire if your people are being traded into slavery. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. So these people that were doing this, the Dahomey people, were by and large, as a people, they were not Israelites. Because you got people that, they try and take these slave trading empires that traded for 3 centuries with Esau and try and pinpoint them as if they were Israelite empires. That does not mix with the scriptures. Okay, and I'm definitely going to do a series on this because the time is coming to really trying to combat some of these lies that are out here and to try and give brothers and sisters better understanding of some of these things. All right, so I'm going to go into showing you the Clotilda. This is the Clotilda. It doesn't have the ship, but itself, but this is the Clotilda ship. Now it goes into it. It tells you that the schooner Clotilda was the last known U.S. slave ship to bring captives from Africa to the United States, arriving at Mobile Bay, all right, in autumn 1859. Now, this is basically near Mobile, Alabama, okay, which we'll get into as we go through the article as well. Okay, now it says here, from sources give the dates as July 9th, 1860, with 110 to 160 slaves. The ship was a 2-masted schooner, which was 86 feet long, with a beam of 23 feet. The vessel was burned and scuttled at Mobile Bay soon after. Okay, now this is what was happening with some of these slave ships. These slave ships were being burned in part because when the British Empire and some of these other places were ending the importation, all right, of our people, they were burning and taking over these particular ships. And a lot of people don't understand that part of the reason why they were ending this was because there was an agreement by many people to now start going towards what was going to be the Industrial Revolution. And it didn't make sense for them to keep importing people. And then on top of that, the ending of the slave trade completely destabilized many of the powerful slave trading empires of Western and Central Africa. And that's how later on, when you get to events such as the Scramble for Africa, which I believe ended around 1885, was when the 1884 and 1885, which is when the major discussion of how they were going to take over those particular parts of Africa that were yet conquered. That's how they were able to do it, by first economically destabilizing, by abolishing the slave trade. Okay, it had nothing to do because they cared about our people. All right, when people read about the history about the British ending the slave trade in 1830 or whatever, and you go through the history of the Caribbeans and different places that were controlled by the British Empire, people think that they did that out of the goodness of their heart. They see some of the information about the arguments about how the slaves were human and how they needed to be treated right. They didn't believe in that. That was all part of the narrative to actually add to the quote unquote why they should end it, when it had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with expanding global domination, because what happened over here basically impacted the entire planet. Okay, and it had further implications in other parts of the world outside of the Americas. All right, so we go here. It says many descendants, Kujo Lewis, the last survivor of the Clotilda, and said to be the oldest slave on the ship, still reside in Africa Town, the community that they made on the north side of Mobile, Alabama. Okay, so that's pretty much what I want to bring with that one on the Clotilda, to show you now that because all these people that are out here saying that these ships didn't exist, that's what happened with some of these ships. A lot of people don't understand why they were doing those things. They don't understand economic destabilization efforts, because our people have a very hard time even understanding gentrification, how much more global international trade and its impact on different societies, people, places, and things, the ability to end slavery and also take over other lands because it's now impacting their economy and weakening them. So that's partly what happened, because soon after this, the Dahomey Empire collapsed. Okay, and the Dahomey Empire was a strong empire at that time, and this is what they did: is they traded, our people. Okay, and so a lot of people that don't have understanding of that over there, when you go to these places, they have a very good understanding of differences between tribes. They have an understanding, especially the elders have a very good understanding of history of the different people and the events that occurred. Okay, a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. They have a hard time understanding how these people would know these things, how people can look at someone and know what tribe they're from. Whereas over here, we think that everybody looks the same because our people have been far removed. But that's okay. That's why you have brothers that are going to have understanding in different areas to help you have a better understanding of what happened and why it happened, and to show the truth of the scriptures, okay, through these particular events. Okay, they match up perfectly. All right. Now it says here, the Clotilda brought its captives to Alabama in 1860, just a year before the outbreak of the Civil War. Even though slavery was legal at the time in the U.S., the international slave trade was not, and hadn't been for over 50 years, because in the U.S. it ended, I believe, not too long before that. I want to say it was 1808, but it depends on different things that you read. I know in Britain, Britain ended theirs at around 1830. It was also coincidentally the same time when they took out the Apocrypha. Around that same time, took out the Apocrypha out of Bibles as well, right, to hide other information that we needed to know about our history, to bring back the remembrance of ourselves. Now it says, along with many European nations, the U.S. had outlawed the practice in the early 18th century. But Lewis' journey is an example of how slave traders went around the law to continue bringing over human cargo. All right. And so this was a part of what was going on with a continued smuggling. It's no different than, prohibition, when they would say they would have a ban on alcohol. But guess what? There was a market for people to go and smuggle alcohol still as well. Okay. So it's the same type of thing. There was always a market. And guess what? Even till today, this still is happening. Okay. In fact, this even happens through adoption agencies, okay, in which our people, our young brothers and sisters, are railroaded into a system and brought into Edomite homes to be basically servants of them, to be abused in every way, shape, or form. And that's one of the other things. That's the reason why when you go into the book of Revelation, it tells you that what was found in Babylon was also slaves, okay? So that is still going on. There's always been a market for that going on for Edomites. Okay, they always have a way to do that. In fact, with many of our brothers and sisters that cross the border looking for jobs, many of them at times are even taken captive by these Edomites. Okay, and by the system that they set up in order to enslave them. All right, now. It says here, let me see. To avoid detection, Lewis' captors snuck him and other survivors into Alabama at night and made them hide in a swamp for several days. To hide the evidence of their crime, the 86-foot sailboat was then set ablaze on the banks of Mobile, Tensas Delta. It may have been uncovered in January 2018, and I don't know if this is going to be here. Let me just double check and see. Yeah, so here it is right here. This is from January 25th, 2018. Is this the wreck of the last U.S. slave ship? Now they won't be able to, truly know unless they find other means of evidence on this ship. But one thing, when you go into history of the Atlantic, there's many ships, slave ships, pirate ships that are found, at the bottom of the ocean or on shores of many of these countries. Okay. Now, a slave ship itself, being that it's made out of wood, is not going to survive from the 1800s. It's just not. Okay. Now, remnants of it could be found in the bottom of an ocean. They could be found on the shore, maybe underneath all the sand. And you could probably find some remnants of it, but for people to say that there was no ships that came over here, that our people already over here, you're as far as the people that are known in America as so-called black people, that they're already here, y'all are sorely mistaken. Okay, you would have to basically, there's something to be said about witnesses. And many of our forefathers were witnesses and passed down stories, wrote things that corroborate things that match the scriptures that happened over here. So you would have to say all these natives that saw what they saw, that all these accounts, they all lied. Your grandfather lied, because guess what? This man had grandkids. He told these stories to his kids. So now you got to basically tell them that their grandfather didn't know what the hell he was talking about, and he was lying to them. That's what you'd have to basically say at this point. So these people, man, I'm telling you, you Jakes that are listening to these people, man, I'm telling you, if you're a brother or sister that is listening to us and you are starting to believe stories like this, we're warning you about the danger of doing that. Okay. Now I'm gonna continue on. It says, most poignantly, Lewis's narrative provides a first-hand account of the disorienting trauma of slavery. After being abducted from his home, not by his own people, This is why I keep telling you guys. I keep telling people all the time. Okay, Esau had taught in schools that we traded our own people. Esau taught in schools this type of information. A lot of our people even believe the same thing. Then our people get all over here. You get all screwed face when you see somebody that's coming from West Africa. You believe that he was a descendant of people that captured and put your people on ships, not understanding the history of these different lands. And this is what we have to keep telling and reminding people. This is part of the reason why, we always say that 12 tribe sign on a level can be a stumbling block to those that don't want to understand that. You got people that believe that the only Israelites are only on this side of town. Guess what? This man had more than likely brothers, sisters, cousins, came from a big family. He had a mother and a father because he didn't come on the earth on his own. So you think, is it not hard to understand that if he came over here and he had relatives, even his own family siblings that were left behind, wouldn't they be Israelites as well? But see, a lot of people don't think like that. A lot of people don't want to take their mind to that level. We have to think a little bit smarter at times as a people. Now, going further on, it says, the abductees spent several months together during the treacherous passage to the United States, but were then separated in Alabama to go to different plantations. Okay, now this is where he was buried. He has a big old marker to commemorate Kujo Lewis, considered the last surviving victim of the transatlantic slave trade. Now I'm going to go ahead and read it a little bit. It says, this is a national preservation and beautification program of African American landmark monuments and history sites. Burial and mark of Kujo Lewis, born circa 1847, Dahomey, Africa, now Benin. This is what I told y'all, a lot of brothers and sisters before, is that some of these things, when you read it, you have to have an understanding of past maps. That's why sometimes it's like if I tell someone like history prior to certain times, they have a hard time understanding that, because they don't understand that these places were called one thing and then became another later. And it adds to a lot of very confusion, because this place that also was Dahomey that later became Benin. There was a place in a part of Nigeria, in the central southern part of Nigeria, that was named Benin as well. That is no longer named Benin. Only it's called Benin historically amongst the people that are over there, or even in Nigeria. But at the end of the day, it's no longer that. It's now known as, like, for example, it's known as Edo for people that are familiar. Whereas this place was known as Dahomey because Dahomey was the one who controlled that particular landmass in what was called the Dahomey Empire. Now, if you want to have an understanding of the Dahomey Empire was the one that had those female so-called warriors, okay, that you've probably seen before. And, you've had guys in Israel try and pass that off as if, oh, man, look at this. This is how we were doing, man. We were doing this. We had Dahomey, man. It's like, bro, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, that's not what's going on. Now, if you watch Black Panther, you also know that those women that were guarding T'Challa, who was also known as the Black Panther in the movie, were a representation of what was called the Dahomey Amazons, okay, which were the female warriors of Dahomey. Okay, those are the ones that generally guarded the king, okay, of Dahomey. So just to give you a backdrop idea, which is not one of our customs as Israelites, okay. This man died in 1935, Plateau, Alabama, Africatown, USA, last survivor. Okay, now Africatown is, again, the northern part of Mobile. Is also known as Plateau, Alabama, because the land, I believe, is kind of up there. It has like a plateau. All right. Now it says here, this is what Lewis told Hurston. It says, we were sorry to be parted from one another, meaning him and the other people that were captives, were held captive. We 70 days crossed the water from Africa soil. Okay, So for 70 days, they were basically, on water, crossing. It says, and now they part us from one another. So meaning they separated us from one another when they got away. It says, therefore we cry, our grief so heavy, look like we can't stand it. I think maybe I die in my sleep when I dream about my mama. So the grief overtook them. It tells you in the curses that you shall be, for the sorrow of thine eyes. That's why I read that in the book of Deuteronomy. All right. That you can imagine the thinking that he thought in his mind, wishing that the morning will come up, and then morning comes and he's miserable. Then he's wishing the night will come so that way he can go to sleep. And then he's waiting, and it's complete torture. The what he went through and what he saw, the grief that took him. This is one of our ancestors that was able to leave behind this story. And this is the reason why, listen, we are going to let Esau know and our people know that we are captives in their hands. Okay? And we're going to let them know why we are captives, because of departing from our power. And that at the end of the day, they are going to pay for it. All these nations are going to pay for it. They don't want to hear it no more. They went and built that museum over there in Washington, D.C., trying to basically find a way to appease us. It ain't happening, man. That's not how it's going to happen. Okay? It's going to have to be turned around on them. Okay? Just like their own scientists say, every action deserves an equal and opposite reaction. Okay? They dealt with us brutally. We're going to deal brutally with them. All right? By the power of Yahweh, man. That's what it's going to be. We're not going to forget it, man. Yahweh ain't forgot it. It's in the book. He ain't forgot it. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. That was written thousands of years ago. They got to face it. They got to drink that cup also. All right? Lewis also describes what it was like to arrive on a plantation where no one spoke his language and could explain to him where he was or what was going on. We don't know why we bring away from our country to work like this, he told Hurston. Everybody looked at us strange. We want to talk with the other colored folk, but they don't know what we say. All right? Because when you go back into a lot of the slave trading that was going on, a lot of people were basically assimilated very quickly, brutally, especially in the beginning stages, because many of them did not speak English. All right, now it tells you in the curses that you will not understand the language, a strange language of the people. All right, now the brothers and sisters that were already here on these plantations, these were what you would call homeborn slaves. Slavery had already ended. These people were already second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation in captivity and speaking, English. So when he came over there as one of the few people that were brought newly, that's a complete culture shock. Okay? He says, as for the Civil War, Lewis said he wasn't aware of it when it first started, but part way through, he began to hear that the North had started a war to free enslaved people like him, which was a lie. The war was about basically exerting more control over the South because of their economic prowess over the North, because of the fact that they had free slave labor, and you had all these people with a lot of land that were getting very rich, and the elites wanted to control and destabilize it. Remember, that particular time and era was leading up to the destabilization of the whole slave trade and the plantation slave model. Okay? That was part of what they were trying to disrupt. That didn't mean that those people didn't still work the fields, because you have to look up sharecropping. Because after the Civil War, sharecropping became, so it didn't end it, that was still an industry. So it had everything about exerting control and establishing a more control and dominance over these particular land masses and areas, which was known as the U.S. Okay, and after the Civil War, there was led a Western expansion all the way up to all the way to California, all the way up to Washington, to take over different other lands and expand the quote-unquote Union. Okay. Now it says here, a few days after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in April 1865, Lewis says that a group of Union soldiers stopped by a boat on which he and other enslaved people were working and told them they were free. Now that he stopped by a boat on which him and the other slaves were working, because remember, this is on the coast. This is over there in Mobile, Alabama. Okay. Now here it says Lewis expected to receive compensation for being kidnapped and forced into slavery, and was angry to discover that emancipation didn't come with the promise of 40 acres and a mule, or any other kind of reparations. Okay, see, these devils, they made all these promises, but they didn't give it to us. Okay, because they're greedy and because they hate us. So the thing about it is that we don't need to ask for reparations. The gospel has nowhere about us receiving reparations from our own enemies in that form. We're going to take it. Okay, the elect is going to take the kingdom. Okay, with Yahawashi. They're going to possess the whole world. So there's no amount of things that they're not going to give up the whole world for us. But what Most High is going to do is going to send Yahawashi with his angels and gather forth his elect, and they're going to take the whole world themselves and everything therein. Frustrated by the refusal of the government to provide him with land to live on after stealing him away from his homeland, he and a group of 31 other free people saved up money to buy land near the state capital of Mobile, which they called Africatown. Hurston won use of vernacular dialogue in both her novels, and her anthropological interviews were often controversial, as some black American thinkers at the time argued that this played to black characters in the minds of white people. Hurston disagreed and refused to change Lewis's dialogue, which was one of the reasons a publisher turned her manuscript down back in the 1930s. Many decades later, her principled stance means that the modern readers will get to hear Lewis's story the way he told it. Exactly. See, a lot of our people, man, they don't want to be reminded of our troubled past and present. This is the reason why you have the situation that's going on with Kanye. Okay, you've had other guys go into stuff like this, guys like B.O.B. You've had other celebrities, and you got a lot of our people, they run and just believe these guys. You know, they don't want to be reminded of this, but we have to be reminded of this. We're reminded of it every day. If you really have eyes to see and you're not blinded, you're going to see that we are yet this day in our captivity. We're not free as a people. There's no amount of thing that you can do to say I'm a free thinker, like Kanye says, and you're gonna abracadabra be in another land and just be free. It's not gonna happen. Okay, we are waiting on Yahawashi to deliver us, but in the meantime, we have to preach this gospel. We have to give the truth to our people. We have to make them bethink themselves according to the scriptures of the state and condition that they were, are, and currently in. Okay, so I'm gonna go and show you. In fact, there's another article, because I want to go into that article, because in this particular history article, it doesn't tell you where he was taken from specifically. All they tell you that he was brought in from Dahomey, from modern day Benin. But I'm gonna give you a good idea. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go into this other article briefly, and there's some interesting information. That's the reason, part of the reason why I'm bringing this up as well, because this is some very interesting stuff. Now, this is from inthesetimes.com. This is an article that is the same thing, written around the same time. It's based on the same, the same brother, Kujo Lewis. Now, it says this is Kujo Lewis, and this is his granddaughters. Okay, this is over in Mobile, Alabama. Now, this right here, part of the reason why I'm showing this is because this right here is just prophetic. Not only is this prophetic by the names of these girls, but I mean, this right here, I was blown away by the names of these two young girls here, and I don't know if they're even alive today. It's just something else, and hopefully, in some way, somehow, we can meet this meet this family, or any brothers or sisters that are from there know this family. It'd be very important to show them, the gospel, and to give them understanding, because this is an amazing story that needs to be told about our people. Okay, now here it is. Kujo Lewis, the last known survivor of the Middle Passage, lived to be about 94 years old. He is pictured here with his great-granddaughters, twins, Mary and Martha, born in 1923. Man, his granddaughters, twin sisters named Mary and Martha. I'm telling you, I really don't even know what to say, bruh. Let's go ahead and continue on this article. All right, so we're going to go ahead and read this. It says, Americans arguably know more about Jupiter than slavery. To judge by educational curricula, students in the U.S. better understand the outer contours and inner strata of the celestial body located hundreds of millions of miles away than they do the enslavement of black people on this continent just a century ago. Slavery is a history America would rather forget, but cannot be allowed to, and that's right. See, that's where that comes in, about Esau's heritage, about, what he's done, these other nations. See, when you go into, I don't want to go into too many scriptures, because I'm going to actually use them in other lessons concerning this very subject. But it specifically tells you that Esau was never going to be, he was not going to be forgiven for what he's done. And him hearing this is what is hurting him. Now it's a shameful spewing that is upon his heritage. Because all this stuff that he thought he had, the one thing that they hate more than anything is for us to remind them of slavery. Okay? Meanwhile, the fake Jew is allowed to talk about the Holocaust from every day. He's able to commemorate. He's able to still raise money off of it. He's able to put people in prison over it. He's able to make movies about it, and no one can tell him he can't. All the lying propaganda information about it. A lot of people don't even know the big amount of lies that were in that whole event that they called that the Holocaust. That's a whole nother story. But we're not going to allow them to not forget it. And guess what? If you want to continue cooning to try and say it didn't happen, if you want to coon and jump with the textbook that was made that said that your forefathers were basically willing workers on them plantations that were not enslaved, go right ahead. That ain't going to change it. That ain't going to change what's written in the book, right? Because what if some didn't believe? Should it make the faith of God without effect? Yahweh forbid. Let Yahweh be true and let every man be a liar. Because that's what the book says. The book says that this is what's going to happen to our people. So if you want to go and act, you want to go and forget it like Esau, and like Esau tell you, oh, let's stop talking about it. If things will get better if y'all can just get over it. No, you do that. If you want to do that to make Daddy Esau feel comfortable, you can do that. We ain't going to do that. We're going to let him know the shameful spewing that's on his heritage. We're going to let him know that Yahweh, the Lord of the universe, hates him for what he did to our people. And we're going to let him know, according to prophecy, what is going to happen to him. Continuing on, Barracoon, a newly published work of nonfiction by the late Zora Neale Hurston, tells the life of the last survivor of the Middle Passage, the oceanic route by which an estimated 12 million kidnapped and enslaved Israelite people, because there's no such thing as an African, okay? So 12 million kidnapped and enslaved Israelite people, or Israelites, or Hebrew people, were transported to the Americas. In 1927, Hurston traveled to Plateau Magazine Point, Alabama, to speak with 86-year-old Olulale Kosula, also called Kujo Lewis. He was aboard the Clotilda, the last known American slave ship. Okay, Kosula, born in Bante, an Isha town in western Benin, was the grandson of an officer to the king. At age 19, he was taken prisoner and placed in a barracoon, a coastal holding cell used to detain Israelites before they were sold and shipped across the ocean. 3 weeks later, Bill Foster, a white American slave trader, ripped Kosula and 109 others from their homeland and smuggled them to Alabama. Okay, so these guys would actually go from Alabama or whatever coastal city that they were in, and they would actually take the ships all the way to the west coast of Africa, in which they would be able to get these of our brothers that were still being taken captive during these times and being held in these holding cells. Okay, and this was very common. Okay, when I studied, transatlantic slave trade history, this is extremely common for a long time. I got other stories that we'll go into. In fact, of someone that one of the most famous guys in all of West Africa, that people know about, and people that will probably watch it that are probably from there will probably, they even ask their grandfather or grandmother about who that man is, that I'll bring up in another lesson. They're gonna be very interested in that story. Now, on this one, I'm going to end here, and I'm going to leave these articles because I don't want to go too deep into this, but I'm going to deal with this Bante thing and the Isha town. Okay, now we're going to go and look at the map. Now, this is modern day Benin, which is before known as Dahomey. Okay, now this right here, I'm going to put, if you see my cursor right here, this right here is Nigeria. Okay, all right, this is the southwestern part of Nigeria. Okay, and this is Lagos, as everybody, the people that know about cities, this is Lagos, the largest city, pretty much in West Africa. And this right here is Benin. Okay, this is the lines, because this right here is Togo. Okay, this is Togo, this is Benin. Okay, this is Ghana. All right, now Benin was controlled by the Dahomey Empire. Okay, at the time. Now, when you go into Bante is on the interior. It was not on the coast. This is one of the things that I've told other brothers about in regards to the slave trade and the slave ratings. What a lot of people don't understand is that many of the people that were on the coastal sides, all right, of West and Central Africa were the people that had already settled there before, from the other nations. Okay, primarily nations that came out of the sons of Ham. Okay, later on, as our people were migrating, whether it was in the first century after the Jerusalem was taken down, or even prior to that, during the time of the Greek Empire, when our people were migrating to places like Carthage, other parts of North Africa, Alexandria, Egypt, over centuries, our people migrated to these areas and formed different empires that lasted all the way up to the Middle Ages. By the time the Renaissance period came, those particular medieval empires that our people had began to crumble, just like everywhere else. Just like just like in the Renaissance period, Esau began to take over Europe. In the Renaissance period, Esau began to take over the Americas. All of our people were basically crumbling down because it was time. The Most High was bringing forth his judgment upon his people and was fulfilling prophecy. Okay, this happened because we were out of line, we were rebelling, we were beginning to take on the customs of our neighbors around us, which became a snare unto us, and that snare led to the slave trade. Now, this Bante area is known as a Isha town. Isha is a tribe of people that were not Dahomey. Okay, now when you look up information later on, after all this stuff was written in information, they began to say that these people were Yoruba, tribe or subgroup of the Yoruba, which was not the case. Okay, and I'll go into some of that information, in another time. Okay, but this particular one, I'm showing you this because this is where a lot of our people in this region were taken into captivity from. They were raided from these interior parts. Okay, places like Porto Novo, Cotonou, okay, were areas of where a lot of the slave trading would be going on, okay? And these places were controlled by the Dahomey because that was actually their territory. They were warring with people that were in the hinterlands. This is something that corroborates and matches information from other guys, which I'll go into. Oludo Aquino, who is a so-called Igbo from eastern Nigeria, who also talks about this too in his own narrative, which matches up everything that the scriptures would say, that we would be traded and sold by our enemies, by other nations. In fact, in Amos chapter 1, it is even mentioned of the nations that traded and delivered the captivity to Esau. So we can't get around this whole thing about about our own people, trading our own people. Knock that noise. If you believe in the gospel, you believe in the scriptures, you're going to know that that was not what was prophesied to happen. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this particular articles in the description box for y'all to continue reading, but hopefully, you had a good idea of, what's going on with this, and, where this will be a continued series. Egypt began with ships. We'll go into various topics, on this particular subject, because right now slavery denial is at an all-time high. Denial that our brothers and sisters were put on ships is at an all-time high. And we're seeing that lies are being made manifest daily for people to believe in. And now, some of these things are being seared into people's minds with like an iron, okay? So we know that this type of stuff is going to happen, and that a lot of our people are going to begin to hold on to this, but this is the point of us being able to show and prove all things, right, according to the scriptures. All right, so this is Daniel chapter 9 and verse 9. To the Lord our God belong mercies and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. Neither have we obeyed the voice of Yahweh, our power, to walk in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath is written in the law of Moses, the servant of Yahweh, because we have sinned against him. And he hath confirmed his words, which he spake against us, and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil. For under the whole heaven hath not been done as hath been done upon Jerusalem. So hopefully this is edifying. And again, I want to give all praises and glory to our Heavenly Father Yahweh, in the name of our Lord and Savior Yahawashi. Peace and blessings be abound unto you that are predestined from the foundation of the world to inherit eternal life in the world to come. Shalom.